So your company's called Frank. What's the name behind that?
We just wanted to stand for something that was honest, that was transparent.
That's Charlie Gervais in 2021, after convincing JPMorgan to buy her startup for $175 million. Forbes, 30 under 30. Media darling. The startup that was going to revolutionize financial aid for millions of college students. She told JPMorgan her app had 4.25 million users. The biggest bank in America didn't even blink. But here's what they didn't know.
This morning, Charlie Gervais could be facing up to 100 years in prison.
Accused of, quote, falsely and dramatically inflating the number of customers that the company had.
Charlie Gervais just got convicted of one of the most audacious startup frauds in Wall Street history. She paid her college friend $18,000 to create millions of fake names that fooled a $500 billion bank.
They were conned, and they bought the con.
How in the world does this happen? How does JPMorgan, right, one of the biggest, smartest global investment banks out there, somehow not figure this out before they lay down 175 large?
I'm about to show you exactly how she pulled it off, why JPMorgan's due diligence failed, and the one email that brought down her empire. This is Scamnomics, and this is how you scam the biggest bank in America. Born into privilege, raised in New York, Charlie Gervais was the kind of person who knew from birth that doors would open for her. She just had to figure out which ones to walk through. At the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, she studied finance while most of her classmates were planning careers at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. But Charlie had bigger plans. She wanted to be the founder, not the employee, the disruptor, not the disrupted. She looked around at her fellow students drowning in FAFSA forms and student loan paperwork and saw opportunity where others saw misery. What's really fascinating about Charlie's origin story is that she genuinely experienced the problem she claimed to solve. College financial aid is legitimately broken. The free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, is a 108-question bureaucratic nightmare that determines whether you get federal aid or graduate with crushing debt. Students abandon the process. Parents have breakdowns trying to navigate it. Billions in aid go unclaimed every year, simply because the system is too complicated to use. So, in 2016, fresh out of Wharton, Charlie launched Frank with a simple pitch. What if applying for financial aid was as easy as ordering an Uber? One platform, simplified questions, instant results. She positioned herself as the young genius who would democratize higher education by making financial aid accessible to everyone. The timing was, of course, perfect. Student debt had reached crisis levels, $1.7 trillion across 44 million borrowers. Bernie Sanders was running for president, promising free college. The media was obsessed with stories about young people crushed by loan payments. Charlie positioned herself as the solution, the savior, the person who would fix what previous generations had broken. But as we all know, the thing about being a savior, people want to believe in you so badly that they stop asking hard questions. And Charlie Gervais was about to exploit that trust in ways that would make Bernie Madoff proud. Frank launched in 2017 with all the hallmarks of a Silicon Valley success story. Glossy website, inspirational messaging, a young charismatic founder who looked great on magazine covers. Charlie was building a brand, and that brand was herself. She was profiled in major publications as a young entrepreneur tackling one of America's biggest problems. The narrative was irresistible. Brilliant millennial disrupts broken system, helps students, makes millions. But while Charlie was busy playing CEO on the conference circuit, Frank was struggling with a more fundamental problem. It barely worked, and almost nobody used it. The platform had attracted around 300,000 users in its first few years, a decent number for a new startup, but nowhere near the scale Charlie was claiming publicly. She understood something that many entrepreneurs miss. In the early stages of a startup, Perception is more valuable than reality. Investors don't fund products, they fund stories. And Charlie was an exceptional storyteller. She optimized everything for press coverage, not product development. Every feature release came with a media blitz. Every milestone was amplified across social media. She hired PR firms, courted journalists, and crafted a narrative so compelling that nobody bothered to look under the hood. This is where Silicon Valley's fake it till you make it culture becomes dangerous. The venture capital ecosystem rewards momentum over metrics, growth over substance, potential over proof. Charlie wasn't just participating in this culture, she was gaming it. She knew that as long as the story was compelling enough, the details wouldn't matter until it was too late. By 2021, JPMorgan Chase had a problem. Despite being America's largest bank, they were losing young customers to digital-first competitors like Chime, Venmo, and Cash App. Gen Z didn't want to walk into bank branches or deal with traditional banking bureaucracy. They wanted slick apps, instant everything, and brands that spoke their language. Jamie Dimon, JPMorgan's CEO, had been vocal about the bank's need to innovate and attract younger customers. The bank had already spent billions on digital transformation, but they were still seen as their grandfather's bank. Reliable, boring, completely uncool. Enter Charlie, Gervais, and Frank. Here was a startup that claimed to have direct relationships with 4.25 million college students. Exactly the demographic JPMorgan was desperate to reach. These were college-educated, future high earners who would need mortgages, investment accounts, and business loans. Frank appeared to be a golden pipeline to the next generation of wealthy Americans. The pitch was irresistible. Buy Frank. Inherit millions of student customers. Become the bank of choice for Gen Z. Charlie claimed her platform had revolutionized financial aid, helping students access billions in funding while building detailed profiles of their financial needs and behaviors. The story takes a dark turn here. JPMorgan's due diligence process, the careful investigation that's supposed to verify claims before a $175 million acquisition, was shockingly superficial. They were so eager to buy into the Frank narrative that they barely scratched the surface. The bank's executives were suffering from what behavioral economists call confirmation bias. They wanted Frank to be successful, so they looked for evidence that confirmed their hopes, while ignoring the red flags. They saw Charlie's media coverage, her speaking engagements, her prestigious advisory roles, and assumed the fundamentals were solid. Charlie had even claimed that 4 million users went to Frank's website to read articles about financial aid processes, though she didn't dispute that less than 500,000 users actually used the platform to complete financial aid forms, a massive gap between engagement and actual utility that should have raised immediate questions. JPMorgan thought they were buying trust, technology, and scale. What they actually bought was about to become the most expensive lesson in startup due diligence in banking history. As JPMorgan's acquisition moved towards closing, the bank naturally wanted to verify Frank's most valuable asset, its customer database. They asked for proof of those 4.25 million student users that justified the $175 million price tag. Charlie had a problem. Frank's actual user base was so low that Charlie decided to create users that didn't exist. Prosecutors said Gervais ended up paying a college friend $18,000 to create millions of fake names with pedigree information. Charlie understood that the fake data had to pass JPMorgan's verification process, so she worked with a data scientist to make the fabricated profiles look realistic. The fake student profiles included realistic names, ages, schools, and email addresses. Charlie's team specifically avoided obvious red flags like asdf@gmail.com or repeated information that might trigger automated detection systems. The scheme worked because of a critical flaw in modern data verification. JPMorgan sent the customer data to a third-party verification firm. But testimony showed that the firm never actually checked to ensure the people were real. They verified the format of the data, not its authenticity, a distinction that Charlie exploited perfectly. JPMorgan's verification process, designed by some of the smartest financial minds in the world, was completely fooled by fake data created by a 29-year-old entrepreneur and her college friend. The bank completed the acquisition, handed over $175 million, and began planning Frank's integration into their digital banking strategy. Reality has a way of asserting itself, even in Silicon Valley. Within months of the acquisition, JPMorgan began to notice troubling signs. Frank's user engagement was dismal. Marketing campaigns targeted at the supposed 4.25 million users generated almost no response. So, of course, JPMorgan Chase sued Gervais, accusing the founder of inflating the size of Frank's customer base. JPMorgan executives testified that Gervais told them she had more than 4 million clients and would have about 10 million by year's end. But it turned out there were only about 300,000 customers, and a list verifying her outsized claim was largely bogus. The Girlboss image that Charlie had carefully cultivated for years shattered overnight. Media outlets that had once celebrated her as a visionary entrepreneur now covered her as an alleged fraudster. The same conferences that had invited her to speak about disrupting finance now quietly removed her from their websites. The fraud was so blatant, so well documented, that legal experts wondered how she ever thought she would get away with it. Just think about it. How did one of the world's most sophisticated financial institutions get completely fooled by a 29-year-old entrepreneur with a PowerPoint presentation and some fake spreadsheets? The answer is pretty straightforward. The bank was suffering from what behavioral economists call corporate FOMO, the fear of missing out on the next big thing that drives otherwise rational executives to make irrational decisions. Jamie Dimon had been publicly frustrated about JPMorgan's struggles to attract young customers. Traditional banks were losing market share to fintech startups that offered better user experiences and hipper brands. The pressure to innovate or die created an environment where executives were more focused on finding solutions than verifying them. Charlie exploited several cognitive biases that plagued corporate decision-making. First was the halo effect. Because Frank had received positive media coverage and Charlie was an articulate, impressive founder, executives assumed the underlying business was equally impressive. They saw her Wharton degree, her speaking engagements, her advisory roles, and concluded that she must be legitimate. There was also what psychologists call prestige bias, the tendency to defer to people who appear successful or accomplished. Charlie had cultivated an image of expertise in student finance, and JPMorgan's executives, despite their financial sophistication, weren't experts in that specific market. They trusted her assessment of the opportunity because she seemed to know more than they did. Believe it or not, gender dynamic also played a role, though not in the way you might expect. The banking industry had been criticized for its lack of diversity and its failure to support female entrepreneurs. Acquiring Frank was also an opportunity for JPMorgan to demonstrate its commitment to backing women founders. This kind of created additional pressure to make the deal work, even when red flags appeared. Most critically, JPMorgan prioritized narrative over numbers. They fell in love with the story of Frank. Young entrepreneur disrupts broken system, helps students, builds valuable business, without rigorously testing whether the story was true. In venture capital, this is sometimes acceptable because you're betting small amounts on unproven concepts. But when you're spending $175 million, the standards should be much higher. Charlie Gervais wasn't operating in a vacuum. Her fraud was enabled by a media and business culture that has become obsessed with young, photogenic entrepreneurs who promise to disrupt traditional industries. The Girlboss archetype, brilliant young women building empires and breaking glass ceilings, had become a powerful brand that could open doors, attract investors, and deflect scrutiny. The parallels to other high-profile female fraudsters are impossible to ignore. Elizabeth Holmes convinced investors to pour nearly $1 billion into Theranos based on blood testing technology that didn't work. Caroline Ellison helped Sam Bankman-Fried steal billions from FTX customers while maintaining the image of a quirky intellectual trading genius. Anna Delvey convinced New York's elite that she was a wealthy German heiress, while actually being a working-class Russian immigrant with no money. Each of these women exploited the same cultural blind spot. Society's desire to celebrate young female entrepreneurs was so strong that basic skepticism was temporarily suspended. Investors, journalists, and business leaders wanted these success stories to be true, So they looked for evidence that confirmed their hopes while ignoring red flags. Charlie understood that her identity as a young woman in fintech was part of her value proposition. She leveraged her Ivy League background, her articulate communication style, and her compelling personal narrative to build credibility that her business metrics couldn't support. The Girlboss image became a shield that protected her from the kind of aggressive questioning that male entrepreneurs routinely face. But this cultural phenomenon isn't just about gender. Don't get me wrong, it's all about how modern media creates and destroys narratives. The same forces that elevated Charlie to entrepreneurial stardom also destroyed her when the fraud was revealed. The media ecosystem that thrives on inspirational stories about young disruptors also feeds on spectacular downfalls. The tragedy is that this cycle discourages legitimate female entrepreneurs who don't want to be associated with fraudsters, while encouraging more bad actors who see how effectively the girl boss archetype can be weaponized. On March 28, 2025, Charlie Gervais was found guilty of defrauding JPMorgan Chase, and she now faces up to 14 years in federal prison. Her co-conspirator was also convicted. Frank, the startup that was supposed to revolutionize student financial aid, was shut down. JPMorgan wrote off the entire $175 million acquisition as a loss. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Charlie Gervais didn't break the system. She played it exactly as it was designed. She understood that in the modern startup ecosystem, perception often matters more than performance. She knew that compelling narratives could attract investors, media coverage, and acquisition offers, even when the underlying metrics were weak. She recognized that society's hunger for young, diverse entrepreneurs created opportunities for those willing to exploit that goodwill. Frank was fake, but it sold because everyone wanted to believe it was real. JPMorgan wanted to believe they were buying the future of youth banking. Investors wanted to believe they were backing the next fintech unicorn. The media wanted to believe they were covering the next great female entrepreneur. Students wanted to believe someone was finally going to fix the financial aid system. Charlie gave everyone what they wanted to believe, even though none of it was true. And in a system where growth is king and skepticism is seen as negativity, that was enough to fool some of the smartest people in finance. Let me ask you, if JPMorgan Chase, with all their resources, expertise, and sophisticated risk management systems, can get fooled by fake data and a compelling story, what makes you think the investments in your portfolio, the startups you read about, or the revolutionary companies seeking your business are any more real? Charlie Gervais created 4.25 million fake users to fool one bank, but she exposed something far more disturbing. In a world where perception is reality and stories are currency, the line between innovation and fraud isn't as clear as we'd like to believe. The next time you see a young entrepreneur promising to disrupt an entire industry, remember Charlie Gervais, because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we want to believe.